In early 19th century England, the rich and titled had a very specific calendar, and the most important part of it was simply called the season. So, what was it? Imagine London, but only for a few months of the year. For the rest of the time, wealthy families lived on their sprawling country estates. But when spring arrived, they packed up their carriages and their finest clothes and migrated to the city. This was the season. It was a non-stop social marathon that ran roughly from April to August. Think of it as a several months-long block of the most exclusive parties, glamorous balls, fancy dinners, and trips to the opera. It was one big, high-stakes social event designed for the upper class to see and be seen. But while everyone enjoyed the parties, the season had one main purpose, and that purpose was marriage. Specifically introducing young women to society for the very first time. These young women, often around 17 or 18 years old, were called débutantes. They were making their debut. For them, the season wasn't just a holiday, it was their job interview. Their families would spend the months in London throwing parties and attending events, all to present their daughter to the right people. It was a chance for her to be seen by potential husbands, and, just as importantly, by the mothers of potential husbands. A successful season meant a good engagement. An unsuccessful one could mean going home in disgrace, with no prospects. So while it was all glittering dresses and champagne, underneath, the season operated like a very efficient, very polished marriage market. So how did this all actually work? It was a packed schedule. Your week during the season might include a grand ball at a nobleman's townhouse, a formal dinner party, and an evening at the opera. Afternoons were for morning visits, which actually happened in the afternoon, where ladies would call on each other, leave their fancy cards, and gossip. The most important events were the balls. This was the main stage. A debutante would be introduced, her name and family announced as she entered the ballroom. Then came the dancing. And dancing wasn't just for fun. It was one of the only chances for a young woman to actually talk to a man privately. Well, semi-privately. Because here's the thing. There were strict rules. A young woman could not simply go off alone with a gentleman. That would be a scandal. Every interaction was watched. Every dance had to be appropriate. Every conversation had to be proper. This is where the mothers came in. The mothers were the masterminds behind the scenes. They knew exactly which families had money, which titles were impressive, and which estates were massive. They would position their daughters carefully, encourage certain dances, and discourage others. A young woman's job was to be charming, graceful, and well-behaved. Her mother's job was to make sure that charm landed a husband with a good fortune. It sounds incredibly glamorous, doesn't it? The dresses, the music, the romance. But for the young women at the center of it all, it wasn't always a fairy tale. It was pressure. Constant pressure to be perfect, to impress, and to secure a future. And that pressure is exactly where the reality of the season starts to look a little less magical. For the young women at the center of the season, the pressure was immense. Imagine being 17 or 18 years old and knowing that your entire future depended on these few months. Every single thing about you was being judged. Your beauty, your dancing, your conversation, your clothing, your manners, all of it was on display. And it wasn't just about being likable. Reputation was everything. One wrong move could destroy a girl's chances forever. A dance with the wrong gentleman, a conversation that went on too long, a laugh that was too loud. Gossip spread fast in the drawing rooms of London, and scandal spread even faster. If a young woman gained a reputation as being flirtatious or improper, families would warn their sons away. And just like that, her season was over before it really began. The stakes got higher with time, too. A girl typically had only 2 or 3 seasons to find a husband, maybe 4 if she was lucky or exceptionally wealthy. After that, society started whispering. They would call her on the shelf. It sounds cruel because it was. A woman in her early 20s who wasn't married was seen as damaged goods, passed over, unwanted. So every year that passed without an engagement brought more anxiety, more pressure, more desperate hope. And let's be honest, this wasn't really about love, not for most families. It was about security. A woman had few options in Regency England. She couldn't build a career, she couldn't vote, she couldn't own property in her own name after marriage. Her future depended entirely on the man she married. So finding a husband with money, status, and a good estate wasn't shallow, it was survival. A wealthy husband meant a comfortable life. A poor husband, or no husband at all, meant uncertainty, dependence on relatives, or even poverty. But here's the thing about the season. It didn't just reveal who was marrying whom. It revealed who held power in British society. The most exclusive events were invitation only. If you weren't invited to the right balls, you weren't really part of the season. And if you weren't part of the season, you weren't part of the ruling class. The whole spectacle was a way for the aristocracy to remind everyone, including themselves, that they were at the top of the world. So while debutantes danced and mothers schemed, the season was really about one thing: power. The power to decide who married whom, the power to decide who belonged, the power to keep the wealthy families wealthy generation after generation. And that power shaped not just individual lives, but the entire future of Britain. The season wasn't just about finding a husband. It was about displaying wealth and power on a massive stage. Think about it. Packing up your entire household and moving to London for months required serious money. The grandest townhouses, the most expensive gowns, the biggest parties, they were all ways of saying, look how rich and important we are. For the aristocracy, this was essential. They needed to show off their status. They needed to network with the right people. A duke needed to know which earl had political influence. A wealthy merchant's daughter needed to catch a baron's eye. The season made all of this possible. It was where alliances were formed, where fortunes were compared, and where families decided who was rising and who was falling. And this system kept everything running smoothly for the upper class. By controlling who married whom, they controlled who kept the money and the land. A wealthy heiress couldn't just run off with a poor artist. That would disrupt everything. So the season existed to make sure people married within their own world. It was social engineering in fancy dresses. Now, you might be thinking of shows like Bridgerton, and yes, those shows capture some of the glamour. The beautiful gowns are real, the grand balls are real. The drama and romance, well, that part is often turned way up for entertainment. In reality, most seasons were more about polite conversation and careful strategy than passionate love affairs. There was less stolen glances in gardens and more sitting properly while mothers gossiped nearby. But the core idea is there, a high-pressure world where young women had one chance to shine. So here's the simple truth about the season. It looked like endless parties and romance, but underneath all that glitter, it was really a carefully controlled social machine. A machine designed to arrange marriages, protect family fortunes, and keep the British upper class firmly in power. For the young women at the center of it, the season was the most important few months of their lives. And whether they found love or not, the goal was always the same: survive the season, secure a husband, and step into the future their families had planned for them. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look into Regency history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the past.